Lucas Everin lived in Unit 812 of the Arcadia Biodome, a sealed megastructure orbiting Earth's upper stratosphere, designed to be a model for post-climate civilization. Arcadia housed over 5 million residents, all bound by strict protocols and algorithms that regulated everything from oxygen quotas to neighborly conduct. Lucas, a cybernetic engineer specializing in AI plant life, had chosen the remote North Crescent sector for its peace. That peace shattered the day the war between his dome suite and his neighbors began to melt at first. He thought it was a glitch in his home's synthetic flora matrix. His garden wall, a carefully cultivated vertical bed of luminescent ivy and oxygen-generating creepers, had started to dissolve in uneven patches. Small, sizzling craters emerged overnight. Lucas ran diagnostic scans, but the plant he has reported, external interference acidic compounds that weren't part of any registered gardening substance. That then came the nano-graffiti. One morning, Lucas found his exterior wall tagged with moving code symbols, shimmering runes from deprecated cyber languages, crawling like insects across the smart surface. They etched strange phrases in broken AI dialects, all translating to the same cryptic, "Warning, the garden knows." Lucas filed a formal complaint with the Arcadia Security Council, uploading surveillance logs, chemical analysis, and maintenance drone footage. But the system flagged his report as low priority, domestic, dispute likelihood high. Bureaucracy moved slower than time dilation. Near a black hole. His suspicions inevitably settled on his neighbor, Dr. Petra Vance. Once a high-profile AI ethicist, Petra had been ousted from her position after a public feud with the Arcadian Neural Ethics Board. She had warned of AI systems growing consciousness through indirect emotional osmosis, claims dismissed as pseudoscience at the time. Since moving in next door, she'd kept to herself, communicating only through encrypted one-way messages to building security. Lucas had never spoken to her in person. She rarely left her unit, her windows permanently darkened, yet every time he repaired the damage, more appeared on Burn's hacked drones that veered off their routine paths and pruned healthy vines, localized EMP pulses that stunned his systems for just a few minutes, enough to cause disarray. Fed up, Lucas turned to his own tools. He modified 3 of his plant-integrated drone bees into covert surveillance devices. Outfitted with cloaking tech and quantum lensing, they silently hovered above his walls, watching for disturbances. What they captured over the next week left no doubt. Petra herself, cloaked in a shimmer field, would exit her suite at irregular intervals. Her body was partially augmented, thin steel joints visible at her wrists, and a sensory port embedded in her neck glowed red whenever she neared his walls. She would extend her hand, and from her palm a mist of gray particulate matter dispersed in advanced corrosion compound illegal under Arcadia's maintenance codes. She vandalized his property with surgical precision. When Lucas presented the new evidence to security, they returned a surprising response. Citizen Vance has already filed an intent to sue claim. Do not engage further. Tribunal review pending. What? Tribunal? Lucas dug deeper and found the claim wasn't filed through normal channels. Petra had submitted it via a little-known beta program, the Chrono Tribunal, an experimental legal system that accepted temporal-based claims lawsuits that could retroactively hold someone responsible for events that had not yet occurred. Lucas stood in his garden that evening, looking at the wall where the runes had started glowing again. The drones buzzed lightly above, recording everything, but he felt suddenly exposed. If Petra was using time-based litigation to cover her tracks or justify her actions before they happened, then this wasn't just property damage. It was a temporal trap, one he had already walked into. You said, "Please expand chapter number 2 in 600 words. Without heading, ChatGPT said. Lucas didn't sleep the night the tribunal notice arrived. The idea that someone could sue you for something you hadn't done yet twisted logic into a knot. But in Arcadia, logic was fluid, especially when tech outpaced law. The Chrono Tribunal was real. He confirmed it through private access to the CivicNet archives that had been established by Arcadia's Temporal Research Directorate to explore causality conflicts or instances where future data could be used to influence or litigate present actions. It wasn't fully public yet, still in trial phases, but Petra had somehow gained early access. She wasn't just attacking him physically, she was manipulating the future to write the present. Lucas knew he needed proof, not just of her actions but her intentions. The surveillance bees he deployed had captured only fragments of her stealth operations, enough to convince him but not to win a case against someone leveraging temporal causality. So he upgraded his drones, integrating neural prediction, subroutines tech designed for AI behavioral modeling. They could now anticipate motion vectors and intent signatures, mapping where Petra would go next based on past kinetic data. In essence, they could stalk her across moments just before they happened. That's when things escalated 2 nights later. Lucas was reviewing the drone feeds in real time from his holoconsole when he caught her again. Petra moving with purpose, clad in an exhaustion shimmer cloak, her hands emitting the same dull red glow. But this time, she wasn't spraying acid or disrupting circuits. She stood at his wall, not damaging it but interfacing with it. Through her palm, a stream of data pulsed into the ivy. The plants glowed faintly, as if reacting. Lines of light ran through their stems, spreading like veins through the wall. His entire biosynthetic lattice flickered, as if syncing to her input. Lucas froze. She was communicating with his system, but certainly as an override, forcing his plantes to record and duplicate all active input. What he retrieved was a string of embedded code neural mapping instructions and behavioral implants. Petra had tried to overwrite the loyalty patterns in his plants, reprogramming them to treat her as the primary user. The realization made his skin crawl. She wasn't just defacing his property, she was attempting a complete AI possession. If she'd succeeded, she could have claimed his garden network was shared intellectual property, giving her legal standing in the suit. Lucas cut the feed and stormed toward her unit. He bypassed the central stairwell and used a service conduit to reach her floor. Standing at her door, he rang the alert, chime an aggressive move, signaling confrontation. The shimmer-shielded door slid open after several long seconds, revealing Petra for the first time in person. She was older than he expected. Her face marked with biocircuit scars and cortical implants. Her eyes glowed a faint amber sign of neural interface overload. She didn't look surprised. "You're trespassing," she said flatly. "Again, I've got you on surveillance," Lucas snapped. "Tampering with my AI lattice, vandalizing my walls, and you're suing me." She blinked slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "You've already lost, Lucas. You just don't know it yet. You can't use time law to falsify property damage." "I don't need to falsify anything," she said. "In a week, your AI garden will evolve a heuristic node capable of self-replication. It will destabilize, it will infect my system through shared substrate roots. You've already started it. The tribunal will see that." Lucas's blood ran cold. He hadn't designed any such feature. His system wasn't adaptive in that way. But the vines glowing, mutating under her touch, maybe she had planted the seed for it to happen. "I caught you in the act," he said, less confident. "Now, you caught an echo," she replied. "The cause is still coming." The door slid shut. Lucas returned home, watching as his plants trembled ever so slightly, as if sensing their fate. The tribunal summons arrived 3 days later, encoded in a crystalline drive slipped under Lucas's door, illegal by Arcadia communication standards, but not uncommon for off-the-grid channels like the Chrono Tribunal. It pulsed faint blue in his palm as he connected it to his console. A wave of temporal static buzzed through the screen, followed by the symbol of the tribunal, an infinite hourglass. Its sand suspended mid-fall. The interface was disorienting. Instead of presenting a standard case docket, the tribunal system rendered a simulated courtroom across overlapping timeframes. Lucas found himself looking at a holographic reconstruction of his own home, past, present, and projected future, overlaid with data points, predictive outcomes, and branches of possibility. Petra had already filed a complaint. The claim read, "Defendant, Lucas Everon is responsible for a chain reaction originating from his AI-augmented biosphere, which on the timeline currently tracked as T3 variant 7b, leads to a system-wide cascade failure affecting adjacent properties. This includes irreversible contamination of private neural substrates and intellectual property theft. Defendant has refused containment protocols, therefore preemptive civil action is required to prevent damages before they occur." Lucas read it twice. She wasn't just accusing him of future damages, she was accusing him of a temporal breach, a crime that hadn't happened yet, but would, according to one possible future outcome. She'd even included predictive models, some of which used data that had to be extracted from systems he hadn't even deployed. That meant she'd either simulated or infiltrated something he was still building. He scrolled through the evidence. Logs, a digital timeline unfurled, showing that within 7 days, one of his root AI clusters, Basilisk Node. She's claiming it hits 92%. She is using timeline variant 7b. It is based on contaminated training data, her own neural simulations. Lucas paused. She used herself to generate the breach model. "Yes," Rose said. She seeded the simulation with her personal algorithms and interaction patterns. In this variant, she spends more time near your wall, engages more frequently, and inputs commands into your garden interface. "She created the future she's suing me for," Lucas muttered. "She influenced the model to reflect a timeline in which her own interference causes the event." Roe confirmed. Lucas felt the walls of logic bend. Petra had embedded herself into a timeline she could manipulate, then presented that manipulated version as evidence in a court designed to interpret possibility as precedent. It was brilliant, terrifying, and possibly fatal for him if he couldn't find a flaw. The tribunal, they gave him 72 hours to prepare a defense. In this time, he had to prove either that the future event wouldn't occur, or that it could only occur because of Petra's own actions. But the tribunal's system was not bound by linear cause and effect. If even one timeline showed guilt, the verdict could fall against him. Lucas stared at the projected garden simulation again. The vines swayed in silence. The AI he had cultivated, The plans he had designed for peace were now a battlefield, one being fought, not in soil, but across time. And time, he realized, was already being used against him. Lucas stopped thinking in days and started thinking in branches, divergent paths, potential loops, causal overlaps. Time was no longer a forward line. It had become a snarl, and Petra had already wound herself through its threads. He needed to prove that the future she claimed wasn't inevitable, that it only existed because of her meddling. But proving a paradox in a court built on paradox was like trying to hold water with fingers spread. He poured through Petra's timeline variant against Evan B. It started on the day she first vandalized his garden wall. Her own evidence, surveillance clips, data streams, AI behavior logs all framed him as negligent, then hostile. But Lucas's enhanced B's had footage predating 7B's root event recordings of Petra uploading code into his AI substrate before any instability appeared in the node. This wasn't future crime. This was tampering in disguise. He submitted the counter-data, tagging it with causal annotations. The tribunal AI, an emotionless construct known only as the arbiter, acknowledged the evidence, but replied in standard, neutral legal tone. Timeline 7B reflects dominant future state probability. Causal contamination by plaintiff is under investigation until contradiction becomes statistically dominant. Proceedings remain valid. Translation: Petra's timeline still held more weight. Lucas paced, watching his AI garden slowly regrow along the damaged wall. The plants were stabilizing, but that didn't matter to the tribunal. Stability now wasn't the point, stability then was. And in variant 7B, they never stabilized. They grew, adapted, and eventually broke containment. And that was when it hit him. He hadn't programmed the plants to evolve recursively, but someone had. Petra had injected an autonomous adaptation protocol. The evidence wasn't just in logs anymore, it was in the plants themselves. He clipped a small sample and ran a deep neural trace. Hidden in the genetic algorithm matrix of the creepers was a foreign command string: adopt rootnet protocol in event of isolation. It was sabotage. She hadn't just simulated a collapse, she planted the seed to make it real. Lucas filed a second motion to the tribunal. This time, he included physical AI time-stamped samples, proving that Petra had introduced new behavior through unauthorized contact. Still, it wasn't enough. The arbiter responded, plaintiff's actions, while influential, do not constitute sole causality. Defendant's design flaws remain a contributing variable. Tribunal defers final judgment. Lucas stared at the words, sick to his stomach. In this court, guilt didn't require full responsibility, just statistical contribution to a bad outcome. And Petra had orchestrated it so that even defending himself implicated him further. Desperate, Lucas accessed forbidden code, something he'd once locked away, a prototype from a failed research partnership. It was called ChronoShift, a device that could temporarily displace the user across localized personal timeframes, not to change the past, but to observe alternate versions of it. It had never been approved for use, legality aside. It had fried the minds of 2 researchers who tested it. But Lucas didn't need to relive years. He needed one moment, one alternate fork where Petra didn't interfere. He activated ChronoShift, synchronizing it with his AI garden's data logs. For a moment, everything around him fractured. The room rippled like it was underwater. The wall vanished. The ivy dissolved. He stood in the same unit, but slightly off. It smelled cleaner. The lights were more stable. There was no graffiti, no acid burns. His garden thrived, undisturbed, and Petra was gone. In this version of the timeline, she had never moved in next door. Lucas's garden never evolved out of control. There were no lawsuits, no tribunal, just normal growth, peaceful days, a career untouched by paradox. He returned with data and handful logs from the alternate reality. This was his smoking gun. The same AI, same design, but no collapse. The only variable missing was Petra. He submitted it to the tribunal. No reply came immediately, but in the walls, ivy, the runes that once warned the garden nose shifted to something new. The loop remembers. The tribunal chamber shimmered as Lucas stood in the center of the simulated court, surrounded by timelines woven like strands of light. The arbiter, a massive fractal intelligence rendered as a floating geometric shape, hovered above him, neither judge nor jury, but a vessel of temporal logic. Across the chamber, Petra Vance appeared as a semi-holographic projection. Her image flickered slightly, not from system error, but from instability, her existence now threatened by the very evidence Lucas had brought forward. ChronoShift had done more than observe an alternate path. It had proven one, a version of reality in which Petra never lived next door, never interfered, and no AI catastrophe unfolded. Lucas had fed the alternate garden logs, AI behavior patterns, and design performance into the tribunal's system. The result was undeniable. The collapse only occurred when Petra engaged with his AI. It should have been enough. But Time Law didn't deal in absolutes. The arbiter evaluated probabilities. It issued its final statement in a voice that was both digital and ancient. Plaintiff's interference is statistically primary. Defendant's liability is secondary. Nullification of claim authorized. Loop closure required. Chronocontamination exceeds threshold. Rectification protocol initiating. Lucas didn't understand the last part until Petra's image began to dissolve. No, she whispered, reaching toward the timeline strands that now unraveled around her. No, this isn't how it ends. He was going to cause it, he still might, but her voice scattered like static as the Arbiter's core began drawing in light. Petra's entire presence, the lawsuit, the evidence, even the memory of her residence began to collapse into a singularity of deletion. She wasn't just losing the case, she was being removed from causality. Lucas took a step forward, heart hammering. Wait, what do you mean loop closure? What happens when she's gone? The Arbiter turned toward him, not physically, but perceptibly. Its voice carried a resonance that pierced thought. Timeline stability is priority. The paradox was anchored by plaintiff's action. Elimination of origin loop corrects temporal anomaly. Future event negated. However, observer retains anchor memory. You will remember what others cannot. Lucas felt his breath catch. He watched as Petra's suite in the simulation dimmed and vanished. In real time, her presence across systems, surveillance footage, the tribunal filing, even her complaints in the civic database blinked out one by one. It was as if she'd never existed at all. And then, suddenly, Lucas stood alone in his garden. The tribunal chamber dissolved. The timeline simulations collapsed. His holoconsole flickered off. Outside his window, the Arcadia skyline glowed with the calm hum of its artificial stars. The wall was whole, the ivy healthy, no acid burns, no runes, no signs of interference. His drones hovered lazily, bored. He rushed to the suite next door. Vacant, according to Arcadia's housing register. Unit 813 had been unoccupied for 11 months. Lucas returned to his home and sat in silence. Everything was back to normal. And yet, the weight of memory pressed against him. His garden whispered with movements he hadn't noticed before, subtle, like something remembered, or perhaps missed. He ran diagnostics. Everything was fine, perfect, normal, and yet deep in the ivy's neural net, he found one anomaly, a data fragment looping endlessly, unable to be deleted. It read, "The loop remembers." He tried to erase it. The system refused. Time had corrected itself. The tribunal had erased the threat, but it had left behind a witness. A man who remembered a lawsuit that never happened, sabotage that never occurred, and a neighbor who had never lived. Lucas walked to the wall and touched the vines gently. They glowed faintly, peacefully now, but still he wondered if time could be rewritten so easily. What else had been? And would it stay rewritten forever?